force because an OHBM member stood up and pointed out the lack or very low amount of EDI happening at that point at OHBM. So the task force was formed to address this issue. And we soon thought it would be better to convert our name to Diversity and Inclusivity Committee, because not only did we want to address gender, but we also wanted to be more inclusive. And this is why we had a name change. In the next few animations, you're going to see the formation of our code of conduct, which we drafted between 2018 and 2019 with input from council. In 2020, we requested EDI training because we felt that even though we were the Inclusivity and Diversity Committee, we were really trained as scientists, and we wanted to do a better job of addressing this huge responsibility kind of placed on us. So we requested for this training, and OHBM was very helpful. And not only did they provide this training for us, but for all the committee chairs at OHBM. We also established the Diversity Award because, as we will discuss in our roundtable later on this evening, working on diversity and inclusivity is often, it's a huge task, but it's under recognized. People, a lot of us who are doing diversity and inclusivity work are ourselves in the underrepresented category, and it really puts a lot of extra pressure on people who are already being underrepresented to take the entire task on our shoulders. So we wanted to recognize that this is a big effort, and increasing this will not only help just individuals, but also academia and science, because right now with artificial intelligence and stuff, it's a big thing when you don't have diversity. So in 2021, we published our publication in Neuroimage. We will discuss that at the roundtable tonight, later on. We started, as I said, the inter-organization discussions, and we conducted a member inclusivity survey because we really wanted to see what the climate at OHBM was, and then decide on the coming years based on what the needs were. And we didn't really actually have this data beforehand, so we needed the data to really formulate how we proceed forward. In purple next, we will see the annual activities that we've established over the years. As I said, this is the third diversity symposium. The first one was in 2019. In 2020, we started doing science outreach to kids, because really the sense of appreciating diversity needs to start at a young age. And we really needed to expose kids not only to diversity, but the diversity of topics in neuroscience. And in 2021, we established a diversity roundtable. It was actually something proposed by council because they really felt that we needed an active conversation on diversity issues at OHBM. So in the next slide, I will basically discuss a little bit about our annual symposium. The goal was to raise awareness about bias and discrimination. And in each year, we tackle a different topic because the issues are widespread and we can't cover everything in one year. So in 2019, we looked at gender imbalances in neuroscience. In 2020, we talked about LGBTQ issues in neuroscience. And 2021, which is current year, we're discussing racial bias in neuroscience. And we have 3 expert speakers in this area who you'll be giving an introduction to in lengthy terms, but we'll show our speakers' images here. So we have Dr. Sharlene Newman, we have Dr. Yakeel Quiroz, and Sade Abiodun. She's a PhD candidate at Princeton University, and really looking forward to all 3 talks today. And on that note, I think we will also, in the discussion section, we really want to also give an eye to challenges identified during the few years that we've been in existence as a committee. The four main challenges are engaging privileged groups still remains a challenge. Most people who come to the symposiums are people who already believe in diversity and inclusivity. So the second challenge is that DEI work is often invisible and underappreciated. Third one is DEI may have different nuanced meanings with different individuals. Considering them all in a community as large and international as OHBM is a demanding task. And it really requires a lot of being aware of sensitivities internationally and doing our level best to address them. And we often maybe don't approach it the right way. And that's why we have a very diverse committee members, and we have learned a lot from the diversity in our committee members on that front. The fourth challenge is lack of DEI is a multifaceted problem that manifests in complex ways at societal levels. So additional voices from OHBM, and not just the Diversity and Inclusivity Committee, as well as inter-organizational efforts are needed to reinforce and extend the committee's efforts. And this is, I think, extremely, extremely important if we don't want to regress back to 2016 and earlier. So I would really put full strength in that challenge and come up with solutions. So if we move ahead, I have the amazing opportunity to introduce Dr. Sharlene Newman. Sharlene has been part of the Diversity and Inclusivity Committee pretty much from the beginning, even before me. So that's amazing. And she has taught us a lot on the committee in terms of how to engage in sensitive conversations without taking it personally, because oftentimes it is very hard to talk about a lot of the issues, and being an international community, there are many different voices. So just, I'm gonna talk a bit about Sharlene. So Dr. Newman is the executive director of the Alabama Life Research Institute, a professor in the Department of Psychology, and adjunct professor in electrical and computer engineering at the University of Alabama. Prior to coming to the University of Alabama, she was the Herman B. Wells Professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Indiana University. Dr. Newman has administrative experience, having served as Director of Program in Neuroscience, Director of the Imaging Research Facility, and Associate Vice Provost for Undergraduate Education at Indiana University. Her research focuses on understanding human neurocognitive functioning with the use of magnetic resonance imaging. Dr. Newman's research has focused on language and problem solving. Her research has expanded and is extremely interdisciplinary, using multiple MRI methods, including functional, diffusion, and spectroscopy to study concussions, substance abuse, and aging and dementia. So before I hand it over to Sharlene, I also wanted to point out that we have a few members from the Diversity and Inclusivity Committee on our panel for discussion afterwards. We have Rosanna Olsen, who is our chair-elect. We have Lucina Uddin and Pradeep Ramana. And I myself, I forgot to introduce myself, but I'm Amanpreet Badhwar. I'm the current chair of the Diversity and Inclusivity Committee. So welcome everybody, and I'm gonna pass the conversation to Sharlene now.
Thanks for that introduction. I'm going to be really quick because we lost some time in the beginning. When I say really quick, I mean really quick, because you can go view the talk. So I don't need to repeat much of what I said. What I do want to emphasize is that I chose the title of the talk, White Supremacy and Neuroscience, for a reason. I did want to be provocative, but I also wanted to discuss white supremacy in neuroscience and really get us to think about how neuroscience contributed to white supremacy and how white supremacy actually sort of impacts all of us. I also want to make it very clear that white supremacy is not a European or North American specific issue. It is global. So that means just because you're not in the US does not mean that you're not impacted by white supremacy. And we all are, regardless of our race or ethnicity. I have some white supremacist ideas and thoughts because it's all around us all the time, right? And so these are things that I think we need to always think about. And we need to think about how it's impacting how we think, how we make decisions, how we choose graduate students, the kind of language we use around different graduate students. So things like we want to maintain quality. What does that mean, right? And so, and I also want us to think about the difference between assimilation and an expectation of assimilation and what we're expected to assimilate into versus welcoming diversity, right? So these are things that I do want us to spend some time thinking about. And the last thing in the talk, you'll see that I do recommend some things for us to do. I will sort of preface this, and I'm sure Sade will sort of echo the same thing. We're not race researchers. We're not race experts. Our expertise comes from living in the skin. It does not mean that we have all the answers to how to solve these problems. I also want to emphasize to maybe people who are in the audience who are people of color to understand that it's not your job to fix a problem that you didn't create. Okay, so I'm going to move on because I want to get to the discussion part of this.
Yeah, if it's okay with you, I'm going to not share my screen again, but instead allow Sade to share her screen so that I can introduce her while she's getting her slides ready, just so we can get this rolling. Okay, so I'm going to read your introduction while you're setting up. Perfect. Okay, so it's my pleasure to introduce Sade Abiodun. She is a budding neuroscientist by day and an aspiring filmmaker also by day. She's currently pursuing her PhD at the Princeton Neuroscience Institute as a President's Fellow. Her work focuses on neurocinematics, the neuroscience of visual media, which explores naturalistic approaches to examining affective and cognitive states. She's an ardent advocate for equity, diversity, and representation in science, and she has worked with multiple groups and organizations to support and uplift scientists of color. She hopes to bridge the gap between science and the arts through the creation and study of visual experiences that center marginalized identities and stories. So take it away, Sade, please.
Thank you so much for having me here this evening, this morning, this afternoon, depending on where you are. I apologize in advance. As you might hear, I've lost my voice a little bit, just excitement at all the live chatter that's getting to happen, not only during this conference, but also, I suppose, with more social interaction and the like. But I wanted to just give a very quick summary of my talk. Definitely everything that I would cover in this summary, you would be able to find in the talk itself. So I definitely encourage you to watch the entire thing. But what I decided to really focus my talk on is this idea of moving from sort of the questions we have around what does it mean to challenge and subvert frameworks, what are frameworks, and then how do we find these like single solutions to these problems, to moving just our kind of perception and ideology around sort of the way that academia and like the academic infrastructure in general is situated, to saying that we have to acknowledge that outside of our own immediate scope of this is, how academia is set up, this is how our environment within neuroscience is set up, it really has so much more to do with the historical and cultural social implications of oppression across the board, and understanding like the intersection and the intertwinedness of those struggles. And in this talk itself, really me wanting to not only say that and state that, but really implement that into the way that I approached breaking down the talk. And so what approach I decided to take was reaching out to a network of scientists, whether that be at a level of peers, so fellow graduate students, fellow trainees, whether they're undergraduates, as well as postdocs, faculty, and just other professionals that are somewhat related to the fields of STEM and research, and asking them the central question of what does it mean to create equitable frameworks within science that will really impact and benefit those with marginalized identities that have been traditionally oppressed within these academic frameworks and academic structures. And you'll see me go a little bit more into the method by which I approach that in the talk as well. And I really broke down sort of the findings and the discussions that was generated by this wonderful group of individuals who contributed into 3 main points. one being equity versus equality, so understanding the difference in why we talk about working towards equity rather than working towards equality alone. Also, just this notion of challenging versus dismantling tradition within academia, and understanding that acknowledging the way that tradition can be upheld is not in itself insulting or trying to slander the way that academia has traditionally been structured, but rather understanding that the way it has been structured has historically left others out. And so that's worth kind of investigating and asking whether that structure can still stand. And then lastly, shifting mindset versus shifting practice. So again, just moving away from the optical understanding of what it looks like to be an ally, what it looks like to do this DEI work, and into more of a framework that is centered on the idea of really being practical and actionable in our actions. And so I added, as Sharlene mentioned, that there are practical steps that can be taken having to do with where funding goes, having to do with our pedagogical approach and sort of our awareness of issues, how we broaden our scope, how we allow for access to resources, mentorship, and the like within our field, within our communities. And lastly, just how we open our science, how we make our practice transparent, our funding transparent, our just general approach to doing science transparent as possible. And I conclude with these points that, again, really tying them into the talk itself, it will make more sense, like kind of the cohesive progression of them. But this idea that diversity, equity, and inclusivity work should not just be sort of done and approached with this idea of serving the marginalized, but rather bettering the field, bettering our communities as a whole, and that everyone does benefit from it. And we need to make it both personal as well as communal in terms of the ways that we approach talking about it. And of course, I just want to give a shout out again. You'll see many of these names pop up in the presentation, and these are the contributors that lent their thoughts and their experiences to my presentation. So really enjoying, or really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, Sade. So, we made you do a talk on a complex topic for 15 minutes, and then we made you take a complex topic that you had a 15-minute talk on and made you condense it into a 3-minute talk. So well done on that. So I should have said at the beginning that we're taking questions at the end, but please feel free to write them into the Sparkle window, and we have somebody who's going to be feeding them to us. So please feel free to put those questions in, and they will be shared with us. And I just wanted to share my screen one more time because there was one of our speakers who couldn't make it tonight, and I just wanted to highlight her talk here. So let me share my screen. So our third speaker is Dr. Yakeel Quiroz. She is an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Neurology at Harvard University and Mass General Hospital. She's also the director of the MGH Familial Dementia Neuroimaging Lab, the director of the Multicultural Alzheimer's Prevention Program, and her research focuses on brain imaging, genomics, biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease, and age-related cognitive decline. And I just wanted to do one quick plug for her talk because you can view it in the screening room as well as the talks of our other two speakers. The title of her talk is Mentoring Latino Investigators, Challenges and Opportunities. And some of the highlights from her talk, she talked about not waiting for opportunity, but creating it. So Dr. Quiroz grew up in Colombia where there wasn't a lot of neuroscience research happening, but she sought it out and created opportunities for herself. She also speaks about creating a support system for herself and for others who seek out similar values. And she talks about how she's approached that in her own laboratory. She's also given some excellent tips about how to seek out mentorship opportunities. So she mentions actually 4 really useful resources in her talk that I encourage you to check out because I didn't know about them, and maybe people in the audience don't know about them either. So please check those out because they might help you, or you might pass them along to others. And then she talks about networking and the importance of not just forming a network and seeking out mentors, but maintaining those connections. Don't just have this, one-off meeting with somebody, but just maintain those connections because you can really build bridges and stay connected throughout your life and throughout your career, even when you advance into more senior physicians. So I really encourage you to check out her talk in the screening room, as well as the other 2 talks. And also Dr. Quiroz apologizes for not being able to be here tonight, but she encourages you to reach out to her through her various contacts there. And now I will pass it back to Aman to start the discussion.
Okay, I've already spoken enough, so I would really like our panelists and invited speakers to start the discussion. So I'm waving the magic wand to make that happen. So please start.
I wanted to start by thanking our speakers for making the time for this, because it is extra work that we put on you, and you rise to the challenge every day. So thanks for doing that to help educate us. But the question is, why aren't more people educating themselves? You know, why can't people take it upon themselves to see the problem and do something about it? Why do we always have to be the ones to push the issue? What can we do to get more of a top-down response? It seems like, you know, we're always, you folks are always doing the hard work, the heavy lifting of teaching your colleagues what needs to be done or what the next steps might be. But how can we get everyone involved? Any thoughts?
I would say it's hard, right? Because those people who have privilege get intimidated or upset when you tell them that they have privilege, right? And with that privilege comes power that it's hard to let go of, right? Even if they're aware of it or not, right? And I would say, I think there have been a couple of comedians. I think Chris Rock is one who comes to mind who said it in a way to make it clear to people that they actually know that they have privilege. And that is, he made this joke saying that like the poorest white person in his audience wouldn't want to trade places with him, right? And so why? And the fact that you wouldn't want to trade places with a famous, incredibly wealthy man tells you that you know that there's some privilege that you have, even being poor and white, right? So I think it's hard to break through that, right? So there's like this psychological protection that sort of allows you not to see. And breaking through that is just difficult to do. And I would also argue that, I mean, there are people who really have had a hard time who are white who say they don't have privilege. And I agree, poverty is a problem, but there's a difference. Race adds some other complexity onto that people just don't want to talk about. So I don't know how to push people to be willing to give up power and share it. I think there's also this mindset that there's a limited amount of something. And so there's this scarcity mindset that people have as well. And this culture in particular really believes in the scarcity mindset, where other cultures don't, but this one does, which means you're fighting for the same thing. And I don't know how to fix that. But
isn't it,
I think
just, sorry, go ahead, Sade.
Oh, sorry about that. I was going to say, in relation to that point, I think even more so than it just being a matter of the scarcity mindset, it's also a matter of just the efficiency cycle, or this calculation of inefficiency versus efficiency, and saying that, well, when we have to pause and make ourselves aware and kind of have a certain consciousness around identity and all these things that feel sort of auxiliary to people when they're in a setting where they're like focused on science and academics and kind of the generation of academic capital, it can feel inefficient to stop and take pause and consider that the people that you're working with might have complexities to their own experiences, even within that academic environment, that are complicated, that are made more nuanced because of their personal identity or because of their experiences socially, their experiences culturally and societally. And so I think it's also just a matter of what you were saying, Sharlene, of like that privilege is power, but also that ignorance is bliss, but not just bliss, but ignorance is efficient, because you're able to just focus on what you see or what you've deemed to be the most important to get done. And until you're made aware of the fact that there other perspective, other experiences, you can stay within that bubble. And then the question, I think the tension that we're facing right now is, at this point, it's very difficult to not be aware to some degree, some extent, that there are these, these underlying undercurrents of issues related to inclusivity and diversity. So now it's moving from a space of, you can no longer claim an ignorance because you've been given this information, but are you now going to employ, are you kind of going to lean into an indifference and say that even though I know this, I still don't want to actively do anything about it because it feels inefficient, because it does not feel relevant to my own personal journey.
I wanted to actually comment on what Sharlene was saying in terms of scarcity mindset. It is true, it exists a lot, but also I think power is scarce in reality also, right? I mean, so one of the things I noticed last year was, especially when Black Lives Matter really took the peak of attention, and there was also some discussions on Black in STEM and few other related movements. A lot of people talked about the importance and committed to pledging to doing a lot of things, but nobody resigned. They wrote opinion pieces, what you call self-press, NEJM, whatnot. Nobody did anything actually meaningful. I haven't seen one white editor say, you know what, I've taken enough air and attention in the last 20 years. I think I can survive if I resign today. Nobody did that. So it's not just the scarcity mindset. They know what they're getting. It's actually willful ignorance. It's like, it's not even indifference. It's willful ignorance. It's the system. I need to do the best for myself. I'm doing it for the trainees. Regular, boring, what you call baseless excuses, right? So, this goes back to what Sade was saying, maybe not directly in this context, but I personally believe we need to make it really personal. We need to not just say, hey, let's do something best. Just say, hey, you, editor-in-chief of Neuroimage or some other big neuroscience, you've been taking up space for 6 years. Just get the hell out. I mean, not like that, but you get the idea, So I think unless we start making it personal, people are not going to do anything. That's what I understand, because I tried to do it in grad school. People don't do anything. They'll say and do whatever is required to just, what you call, escape from the situation with minimal damage to themselves. They won't do anything actually reforming in a sense.
Yeah, and that's hard. I mean, again, I've been in a few administrative positions. Once I became a professor and then a full professor, you see the other side, right? And sometimes what I've seen is that people say things, their beliefs come out, right? When they don't realize their belief, that what they truly believe comes out, right? And so I've been in situations where people thought that they were doing good by, by the minority, right? They're helping them. But the words that they're saying, they don't even realize are racist or comes from, and in some ways, I mean, and I do want to make neuroscience as a field, make them think about what they did to contribute to this, right? So, all of that pseudoscience around skull size and head size and white people are superior and Black people, Africans are at the bottom and indigenous people are here. And so all of that pseudo neuroscience and, that was going on made it easy for people to place this hierarchy of humanness that allowed people to mistreat other people, right? Neuroscience did that. And as neuroscientists, we need to take account of what we did, not us living today. Well, but some of us are still doing it. But we need to take it into account, like we need to confront it, address it. We need to think about and reflect on all of the things that we say when we're evaluating students and job candidates. Because we say, I've heard people say all kinds of things that they don't realize is coming from that tradition that impacts their decision, right? And so when you say personal, I say personal in that everyone needs to take account of what they are doing to contribute to where we are.
Yeah. I just want to remind the audience, we do have some extra time, so we will be able to go to 20 past the hour to keep having this great discussion. And I just see a few questions coming in, which is great. If you don't mind, I'll read out one of these questions that says, as more and more teaching and training on these issues blends into graduate teaching, what are the key aspects to integrate to ensure upcoming scientists can combat racial bias in the field?
I think that's a huge, huge question to ask. And it really, there's many ways that it could be answered. I think the first point is that in terms of the individual responsibility to combat racial bias, understand that it does go beyond what you and as an individual may be able to like solely kind of induce in terms of a revolution in the field. It's about you working alongside, like tapping into community, building a network, and saying that together with combined forces, we're able to do this. Because I think very similar to what we were saying at the beginning of the talk, I don't know if it was actually during the live session or not, oftentimes when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion work, those that are engaged really, passionately in these conversations are those who are directly affected by issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, meaning that that question is one that often falls into the laps, falls onto the brains of underrepresented trainees, underrepresented academics in the field, and then can add to that burden of representation that's created to say, it's my job not only to exist in this field as a researcher and as an academic, but also to be this advocate, to be this person who's actively using my experiences to sort of change what I see. And that is important. I don't want to ever kind of take a moment and say, don't do that. It doesn't matter to do that. I think it matters to a certain extent, but also understanding that you have to sort of, and I'm speaking in this context specifically to underrepresented trainees and underrepresented members of the academic body, understand how to prioritize and how to sort of protect your well-being and your sanity in a space. Understand that sometimes if a space is not willing to change, it may be more effective for you to not be in that space. And that's something that I think we shy away from saying and talking about, but there is a degree to which sort of understanding the individual responsibility in changing a culture that is generationally and like kind of imbued, it's very difficult, it's very large. So unless you have that community at hand to do that and have the resources, have the backing, it's something that you should really do with caution, like proceed with caution. In terms of allies in the field and those in positions of power, I think it is important to understand that your education on diversity, your education on other people's experience and what it means to be an ally goes beyond, like I'd said before, saving your counterparts that come from underrepresented backgrounds. DEI work is not charity work. It is not savior or like kind of salvation work where there's this particular savior that's sort of going to bring everyone up and completely revolutionize the field. I think that in itself, this whole very hyper incentivized structure of if you do this, then you will get this recognition and this award can be somewhat testy at times, because though it of course buys into sort of the system of academic reward that we have already, it also makes it seem as though the only reason that you should be invested in changing field is for the recognition that you'd receive. So I think key aspects to integrating would just be recognizing that the integration, it should really just be another kind of normed standard part of our training as academics, in the same way that training for PIs, training for lab leaders should include the pedagogical awareness, should include this understanding of what mentorship and team management include. You are not only running a lab, you are running a business, essentially. You are generating knowledge, you are generating capital. You should also have that awareness of what it looks like to be an ally, what it looks like to be sort of an activist in every way possible. And that should become fundamental to our academic identities rather than auxiliary to our academic identities.
Yeah, And I think some of this should be incorporated into ethics training, right? Because you see a lot of research that comes out that's looking at race, right? And race is not biological, right? And so, and one example that I give in my talk is, you know, there are these racial disparities in terms of Alzheimer's or dementia, and where African Americans have a higher rate of dementia than non-Hispanic whites, right? That has nothing to do with the color of my skin, right? So it's unethical to blame it on melanin, right? It's not melanin, right? And so what is it? What I think in terms of these kinds of things, I think putting it in ethics classes where you're discussing the harms that have been caused by neuroscience and the harms that are continuing to be caused in this space, and really kind of taking a step back and thinking about, like, why do I believe this? Where does this come from? And I think cognitive scientists do have a role in this that they're not accepting, right? Because we all have stereotypes. In some ways, that's just how our brain works, right? So I have a stereotypical representation of a chair. It helps me make decisions faster, recognize things faster. We all have stereotypes. We have stereotypes of people too, even though we shouldn't, but we do it because that's how our brains work. So, you know, to say you're bad for having a particular stereotype, that's how your brain works. But thinking about, how did I get this stereotype? What contributed to the development of this stereotype about a group of people? And using your cognitive control to not allow you to make decisions about individuals based on your stereotype, right? And this is where cognitive science can come in and play, and social psychology can play a role, right? And so I think there are things that we as a discipline, sort of incorporating all of psychology, that we should be doing that we're not doing. And some of that is because some of us are stuck in the sort of white supremacist mindset and we don't want to do it. We study stereotype and stereotype threat, but we're not eliminating it from our own thought, right? And so, I mean, I think there's a lot that we can do that we can incorporate into the education system, just to get people to sort of think more critically about how they think, right? And that's what cognitive science is right? You know, it's thinking about how you think, but we're not doing it.
So Sharlene, there's a few questions from the audience. One of them is, I've seen several so-called big PIs that love to speak about DEI in public, but actually no clear changes have been made in their own labs. Example, recruitment, unbalanced mentoring, favoring some students over others, partially because they may feel no need to change, or maybe the way they have been organizing their lab have been successful. What do you think can help such PIs to change their actual practice instead of doing public lip service? And I actually kind of agree with that comment, because these days, even when we write grants, there's a big focus that the granting agencies have put on EDI or DEI. And we are getting very good at crafting what people would like to hear, but how does it actually get implemented? So if our panelists could discuss that.
I would argue that, like, the granting institutions, NIH and NSF, should have penalties for people who don't do what they should do, right? So and because I was an associate vice provost for undergraduate education, I have like a better sense of how PWIs handle underrepresented minorities in STEM in particular. And PWIs primarily white or predominantly white institutions, right? And so that you hear about these sort of leaky pipeline issues all the time, right? Like somehow, you know, the Black and brown people just sort of fall out of the pipeline. There's nothing we can do, they just fall out. That's not true, they're being pushed out. they're not just falling out like the institution has nothing to do with them falling out. They're completely being pushed out, right? So if you tie funding for an institution to how well they retain students in STEM, for example, they'll find a way to retain students in STEM. So, I mean, I think there should be both structural sort of changes and things to kind of force people to do the right thing. And then there should be some individual kinds of things where people do a lot of self-reflection and think about what they're doing and why they're doing and how they're thinking and where these thoughts come from and that kind of thing. I think you need to have both of those. But NIH could do more to put the screws to institutions who aren't doing it, or even PIs who aren't doing, like, to keep giving people money for the fake DEI things that they write when they know that they're not getting their money's worth out of it. They're not increasing the number of underrepresented whatever. That's just throwing money away. And NIH knows that they're doing it. They haven't made that change.
Transparency as well, I think, is a huge kind of underappreciated, undervalued tool in this. I've always thought about this, actually, even since my undergraduate trainings. We have, times where at the end of course, at the end of the semester, you'll get course evaluations back, based on a particular course that you've taken. And sometimes, depending on how egregiously skewed in either the positive or negative direction those reviews are, there might be some sort of follow-up action saying, like, okay, this professor received this sort of review, but maybe we should look into this more, evaluate this. Sometimes those evaluations are entirely discarded. And I think it's always been interesting to me that that's not a more sort of utilized and implemented sort of tool that we have to say, what does it look like if we actually provide evaluation, and you're getting to hear from trainees, from those on the like kind of lower levels of the hierarchical tier, what their experiences with their given superiors, whether it be their postdocs, their faculty, their PIs, and so on and so forth are, and then taking that into account. It's very, I mean, it's a very tried and true system that we have within the field, that letters of recommendation are how you advance from one stage into the next. If you're applying for grants, you need letters of recommendations. If you're applying to graduate school, if you're applying for any sort of position. However, it oftentimes we only structure it so that those recommendation letters are coming from those who are above you, who have power over you, rather than those who you would actually be working underneath with. And of course, there would have to be some sort of making sure that the power dynamic isn't flipped in a terrible way, so on and so forth. But I do think there could be value in actually not only seeking out, but truly valuing, adding value to the feedback of trainees and of students with regards to how they feel like their environment is academically, how they feel like it is for them as trainees. And I think that in itself, that being applied and implemented as an actual metric, rather than just sort of, we'll collect these evaluations and nothing will be done with them, will create something of an accountability and a transparency structure that may allow for it to go from just talking about doing this work to actually hearing from those who would be impacted, whether they're seeing actionable change.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to make sure we got to this interesting question from the audience about the global issues, which is, we're talking a lot about things that happen in the US or Western, scientific groups. But there's the issue is of course universal and global. So the question is, how do we address issues in developing countries, or people moving from the East to the West, or these much more complicated representation questions that come when you consider, for example, OHBM, it's a global community, and what counts as diversity in the US isn't the same as what counts as diversity somewhere else. We talk about this a lot as part of our own diversity committee, but we're curious, or someone in the audience here is curious about how we can address issues that, or when can DEI become truly a global phenomenon?
Well, I think we are keenly aware of this issue. So we conducted a survey last year and many members have pointed this out. I'm personally very passionate about making it truly global, based on my own experiences, as well as me talking to a lot of international students, or my participation in various student associations, etc. So I think we just need more students, more international students talking to, as well as taking leadership positions in this organizations or wherever they can. Um, Partly we actually don't fully understand what is needed too, mostly because I think we probably haven't explored this as much so far. So, but I know that the leadership is actually keen and committed to making it their best, although they haven't actually really delivered one important thing, that is to actually organize the conference in South America or Africa yet. So I'll hold them accountable, and we're still trying our very best to reduce the registration cost to make it even more inclusive, to get the voices, to hear the voices from all these underrepresented countries. But it's still like a volunteer organization with limited resources, so we can only do what we can. And I think know that we are committed.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, white supremacy doesn't just impact Black people, right? So some of this, you know, it is about that as well, right? And so for example, I know, you know, there's all this sort of pushback that we talk too much about like North America, but that's where I'm from and we have data.
Well, I'm from India, and you know, we were conquered. We went through similar situations, and you know, I completely agree. It's not just
right.
It's not just for the Americas, exactly.
So in Society for Neuroscience, they do have some data, but US sort of data in terms of, and neuroscience sort of generally, not just sort of the brain imaging, sort of the human brain mapping sort of part of neuroscience. But it's like 90+% of faculty in neuroscience are white. Right.
Wow, what a surprise.
Right. But there's way more than 10% of the grad PhD grantees who are Asian, but they're not tenure track faculty. Right. So again, it's the, you know, when we're talking about white supremacy, we're not just talking about Black people, we're talking about everybody who's not white. Right. And so, and I've had several conversations with, and as the director of the program in neuroscience at IU, and when I saw that statistic, I was the director at the time, and I was like, that's not true here. And then I had to take a step back and go, wait, it actually is true here. But I got lost in it because we had, well, IU has, I'm not there anymore, a number of like Asian research scientists and graduate students, both sides, but they're not tenure track faculty, right? And so then the question becomes, what the heck is going on? What are we doing? But I didn't even think about it because I saw them around and I didn't see Black people around. So it was more clear to me about sort of where that was until I saw that statistic. And then I sort of poked a bit and it was like, what? Yeah. So it's not just about Blackness, right? And so, and I think we have to sort of think about all of the peoples of the world. That said, anti-Blackness is global, right? Anti-Blackness is all over India, because I've been. It's definitely all over Europe. It's all over like all of Asia. Colorism is a big thing. And so there's a lot going on sort of globally in terms of anti-Blackness, but there's also like anti-everybody that's around too. It's just a little more subtle than it is for anti-Blackness. Only a little, but it is something.
Yeah, this is great. I'm so glad we're able to bring up these points. There was one more question from the audience that was, I think, a good one to close on about how, as an early career researcher, it's difficult to advocate. It's difficult to have these conversations, especially with PIs or other people in power who might be in denial. Any advice for trying to have these kinds of conversations as an early career researcher when there's so much at stake?
Yeah, get around them. I would say,
No,
sorry.
but
No.
I feel like
No,
if you accept things as early career researchers, you're going to be stepped on for the rest of your life. So, pick your battles, but do pick them, that's my 2 cents there.
yeah,
And I
so
completely
yeah, I
agree.
worked with I worked with many people who either deny or argue back about this stuff. I mean, obviously, if it's your own PI or someone who has power over you in your department, you can't really engage them or confront them to publicly or openly. But there is still venues and channels within your university or conferences where these deniers go to and expose them to like data or what is lost because they didn't do well enough, And I think they're definitely wrong saying, oh, science has done well so far without having to do anything. It's just completely ignorant and wrong. I think we would have made a lot more progress if had we been more inclusive and more diverse, There is a gigantic waste of resources and time because people are not sharing. You can point them to open sharing of data as a good example of how science would advance, just being more open and inclusive about it, right? So you don't have to, right? That's a simple example to basically what's the word? Moot their point.
Yeah. But yeah. So as someone who's sort of gone up through all of these ranks, I completely agree with Aman. You really do have to pick your battles. You have to, and what I tell students is you're playing chess, not checkers. And you have to be strategic. You have to know when to say something, when to not say something, when to wait to say something, when to, and if you have a sponsor on your campus and sponsor, not a mentor is not going to necessarily help you with this, someone who has some power who can actually do something, then you can go to that person. Otherwise, you really have to keep, as a trainee, you have to remember why you're there, and you need to make sure you get what you came there to get.
Well, sometimes I think you have to catch the bull by the horns, in my personal opinion.
But sometimes, but that's if you're willing. That's if you won. If you're willing to lose your career, and you
no, not really. I think awareness has increased quite a bit nowadays.
No. Well, not for Black people. I would say that. So you really do have to play chess. I'm not saying that you don't find a way to get what you need, but you have to be.
This goes back to what Sade was saying before, think about whether the environment is making you effective or not. Maybe if it's not the right environment.
Right, then it's time to leave.
Yeah, I went through some really, really toxic environments, and trying to play chess was not a great idea back then. I should have just run the hell out from some places early on.
But that's part of playing chess. That's part of understanding the situation and knowing when to leave and how to leave. Yeah. But that's like, you have to stay like 3-4 steps ahead. You have to know your opponent.
Right.
Yes. I'm like, that's the chess part of that.
Also, you have to, you need to know yourself better, how much you are willing to accept,
Yes.
So another way.
But that's all a part of chess.
Okay, this is great. I do have to wrap up. I have like 2 quick points. I myself have left toxic environment because of that, because I didn't want the long-term consequences of it on my psyche. Second of all, maybe a quick reply to that question was, often when you're faced with biases, you have a gut feeling, you feel like horrible and you don't know why you felt bad. I've learned to like not respond right away, because it often comes across as, oh, she's being too emotional, or he's being too like, too much of a reaction. I usually give it a day or 2 and think about why I had such a bad reaction to it and why I felt that way, and then get back to that situation. But I do get back to the situation. I don't let it go, because I have let it go in the past, and it just brings you down as a person. So having said that, we are lucky today because we have a roundtable on diversity starting in half an hour, which we do have to set up for. So I'm going to take this opportunity to really thank Sade and Sharlene for taking the time to come and discuss many issues with us today, and to our panel members. And we can continue this discussion in half an hour if our audience is willing. So let's meet again in 30 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.